It is The Blitz. He's Joe Reinangle. I'm Jason Minnick. It's time for Mondays with the Moose. Three-time Super Bowl champion with the Dallas Cowboys, now an analyst with Fox Sports, amongst other jobs. Joining us now, Daryl. You know, we talked to you on Friday, and based on that conversation, I'm going to say you probably weren't too surprised with the final outcome yesterday.
No, unfortunately. I wasn't surprised by the outcome, but I think I was surprised how it transpired during the course of the game. So I thought San Francisco would match up well with Dallas, their pass rush against Dallas's offensive line, just using the 4 and being able to drop 7 into coverage, kind of put that bubble over the top, not letting any of the big plays get down the field. I thought in other areas, the run game against Dallas's defense, I actually thought they did a nice job there. The penalties, again, was the surprising thing, and especially at the end of the game with the defensive holdings. That was really surprising.
You know, Daryl, we've been talking a lot about this, and obviously Cowboy fans are, going off, and everybody's upset and frustrated again. But and a lot of people are blaming Mike McCarthy and that coaching staff. But when it comes down, as a former player, when it comes down to making those plays and committing those penalties, who does that fall on? Don't the players get some of that responsibility?
Absolutely. If we're going to, put it all on the players when you win games, because it's about the players, not the plays, and we've heard all the cliches. It's the Jimmies and Joes, not the X's and O's. There's a lot of different ways to say it, but it's always portraying that the players are the most important part of the game. So when you have a poor performance, they have to be accountable for some of the responsibility there as well. I really doubt that Dan Quinn has ever taught Randy Gregory that technique in taking on a block. So, some of them are, the defensive holding. I was actually watching the game with Mark Stepnowski, and he was absolutely blown away to see 3 defensive holding penalties. He said they never called it back in the 90s. So that's the way the game has changed, and you've got to adjust to that. And they spend a lot of time looking at the crews and what penalties, they tend to lead the league in calling. So there's information that's there that I know that Mike McCarthy and his staff got the message across to their guys. But then, some of them are just part of the game. You had some struggles in the offensive line, getting overpowered. Eric Armstead is a very, very powerful inside rusher, and he gave him kind of fits all afternoon. So some of the penalties you're okay with. Coaches are just going to recognize that as part of the game. But the pre-snap penalties, some of the poor technique and just careless there at the end. So yeah, there has to be accountability from the players. And there's, people, calling for the firing of Mike McCarthy. It's nonsensical. I mean, there's tremendous strides from last year to this year. Is it a disappointing loss? Absolutely. It's heartbreaking, especially how well they were playing early in the season. But Mike McCarthy has them trending in a good direction. The one thing I would be worried about right now, if I'm a Cowboy fan, is Dan Quinn going to stay for year 2? Or are we going to lose him to one of these new openings?
Well, and I think maybe that's part of the thinking, Daryl, is, Mike McCarthy and game management, a team that leads the league in penalties, and that's cost them. Do you elevate Dan Quinn to become head coach and get rid of Mike McCarthy because you keep some of that consistency there? And we've seen the quick turnaround and the impact that Dan Quinn has had.
Yeah, but Mike talked about 14 seconds is enough time to execute the play that they wanted to execute. We used 16. 16 was always our marker. If we were going to take another shot down the field and stay in the field of play, we felt that in 16 seconds we could get our field goal team out there lined up and get a field goal kick. Or we needed 16 seconds to press the middle of the field, get up on the line of scrimmage, and spike the ball. They seem very confident that they could do it in 14. Now, I think Dak Prescott carried the ball down the field a little bit too much. And one of the things you have to understand are the mechanics that happen in that play. The umpire, back when I played, used to come from the defensive side of the ball. It was easy for him to get to that ball and spot that ball and put it into play. You saw how hard it was coming from that new position behind the offense because the offensive line is down and ready to snap. He's got to step in there, get the ball ready for play, and then get out of the way. So, you also have to understand those mechanics. And how many times have we seen a wide receiver, catch a ball on the outside, not get out of bounds, and he'll come sprinting down that line with the football in his hand, looking for the umpire to expedite that process. And that was something that was not done at the end of that play. So there's a lot of things they can learn from it. But I felt that Mike McCarthy gave a good explanation and felt very confident. They have rehearsed that play. They have practiced that, especially that as a specialty situation. That's where we came up with our 16 seconds. But they obviously feel that 14 was enough. And maybe you were told, hey, we only need 10. We don't need 17. So you've got to have that feel as the quarterback with the ball in your hand at that point of knowing when it's time to get down, so you can spike that ball and get that field goal attempt or get that shot down the field.
Yeah, Moose, looking at that play, obviously there's a lot of eyes on that. But the thing that was really disappointing for me was, well, a couple of things. The way the Cowboys came out and started that football game again, it just seemed like San Francisco just came out immediately and punched them in the mouth. That was one thing. The other thing is the offensive line, Daryl, is just really seems to have taken a turn for the worse, for lack of better words.
Yeah, that's not the line that they had 3 or 4 years ago. And Tyron Smith is, at a point in his career, and he was so dominant, and he was such a staple out there at left tackle that you didn't have to worry about anything. I mean, there was nobody in the NFL that was going to give Tyron Smith any problems. Well, he's not at that point anymore. He's battled some injuries. He's into double digits now. You've got to be able to help him out a little bit. Connor Williams is still struggling on left guard, very inconsistent there. Biotish at center, from time to time. Even Lyle Collins, has had an up and down season. Zach Martin was the one consistent guy, but I think we see these names, and this happened to him several years ago. I remember talking to Jason Garrett about this. There were names that you remember from the past. Leonard, I can't remember Leonard's last name, and Mark Colombo, and the big left tackle that we had. But there was, they were coming to the end of their run together. But you still remembered the names. And, there was a big rebuild in the offensive line. And then all of a sudden out of that, you got, a young Tyron Smith, and you had this whole reconstruction of the offensive line. And they went on a great run through, the mid-teens. And I think we still remember those names, and there's this is getting ready to go through another transition like it did back, in the early teens. So yeah, I agree with you. And let's not take anything away from that San Francisco front. That was one of the areas of concern I had is just, how good they are just as a down 4. That they lived up to that. And a lot of that game was played without Joey Bosa in the lineup. So
yeah, exactly. Daryl, as we visit with Daryl Johnston, the Moose, 3-time Super Bowl champion, and Leonard Davis, who is, I think, who you were thinking of, with him and Mark Colombo, Corey Proctor, that group. And I think we're going through it here. You mentioned another name from the past, Mark Stepnowski, who, by the way, nobody would recognize Mark today if you think about what he looked like back in his playing days. But as you're watching the game with Mark Stepnowski, watching the defensive front just out physical and dominate that Cowboys offensive line, I'm curious what you guys were talking about while you were watching that happen.
That would have never happened to our line. We had some rough games. The Saints got us one time. Philly got us. You have your ups and downs, your ebbs and flows. But it was kind of funny because I remember, during the pregame shows, Dave Wanstatt, somebody kind of brought up, that physical punch in the mouth style that San Francisco does at the beginning of the game. And Dave Wanstatt was really adamant about, hey, this is football. Football is a physical game. This isn't the first rodeo for the Dallas Cowboys. That's a big offensive line, and really kind of came out and said, that they need to match the physicality. They will match the physicality, and they didn't. They didn't. I think Joe makes a great point. The way that game started, just boom. The biggest concern you have happens on the opening drive. It's like going back to that Super Bowl between the Colts and the Bears. And the one thing that the Colts couldn't let happen is Devin Hester return a kickoff for a touchdown. He does it on the opening kickoff. There's things that you're going into a game where how important it is, and you don't want to let that happen. And I think it was really hard for Dallas to kind of get back into any type of rhythm or to regain that confidence after San Francisco came out and was so successful on that opening drive. And then they followed it up. Thank goodness they were stalling down in the red zone and had to settle for field goals. But they built a lot of confidence on that opening series, and they rode that through that whole first half.
But I think that's where you can take some positives out of this. And you mentioned Dan Quinn and the job that he's done. But that defense, they really were a bend but don't break defense. The last couple of games here in the NFL, they did the same with the Arizona Cardinals, held them to a lot of field goals, and they held San Francisco there as well. So help us out here, Daryl. I mean, the future still looks pretty bright when you're looking at that defense and the stars they have on offense.
Oh, without a doubt, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Now the good point this year is you can be kind of selective in where you want to add and get better, as a team. There's lots to do. I know it's a tough loss. There were expectations, and I know people didn't expect to get knocked out in the wild card round. So you've got to process that and just, take a page from the player handbook. You get 24 hours, to kind of grieve this loss, but now you got to get back on to what's going to happen next year. And, that's where the organization will go. And I'm excited to see what Will McClay is going to do, how he's going to move forward with everything. The biggest thing is, are you bringing in new coordinators? I mean, both of these guys have interviewed for a number of jobs. What happens with Kellen Moore? What happens with Dan Quinn? That could be the biggest pressing issue of the offseason is what happens with the staff. You always know there's going to be shakeup on your roster, and you're going to have some movement there. Boy, they've got a pretty big list of guys who are free agents this year, and being strapped against the cap. Obviously not all of them are going to be able to be brought back, but I saw that today, and it was more substantial than I thought. With good role players, some young guys, getting their second contract opportunity. It's going to be hard. It's going to be tough. It's going to be interesting to see, what Will is thinking as he puts that roster together for 2022. But lots of good things to be excited about. Lots of positives to build on. But because they played so well at times this year, it is disappointing to see them have a type of game like they did yesterday and lose a home game in the playoffs.
The Moose, Daryl Johnston, with us here on the Blitz. And Daryl, you're an executive. You've had that role now with a new league. You had it with the Alliance. So you understand a lot of what's going on front office wise. You also know Jerry Jones very well. I know you said you think it's ridiculous for those thinking that Mike McCarthy needs to be out, but as well as Jerry, the last night, it's not like he didn't want to talk about the future of his head coach, but he didn't kind of just try to squash the idea that there would be a decision there. And Jerry has canceled his radio appearance on 105.3 The Fan tomorrow, and that rarely happens. He's pushed it to later in the week. I'm just trying to read between the lines. What do you make of that?
Well, that does sound kind of ominous, right? Especially with everything that's going on.
Yeah, it's what he didn't say last night, Daryl. It's what he didn't say last night about Mike McCarthy, and then knowing that he's pushed a regularly scheduled interview that he loves off for a couple of days just seems odd to me.
Yeah, that is. I hadn't heard that. That is. It doesn't sound like it's just, hey, I need to collect my thoughts, and this is going to be an important press conference, and I want to make sure I say the right thing. This sounds like more of, I got to take a long, hard look at this and see exactly, what I think needs to be done here at this point in time. I think it would be a bad move to move off of Mike McCarthy right now. I think he made a tough decision last year, moving away from Mike Nolan. And I'm sure the fact that Dan Quinn was available, made that a little bit easier for him. But the big thing to me is the strides they made, and you've got it headed in the right direction. And you don't want to inflict change from within when you're facing change from the outside potentially on your staff. So this will definitely be an interesting week after you kind of frame that whole that whole perspective on him postponing things to later in the week.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. And of course, when it all works out, we'll talk about it next week and probably focus on more of what's still going on in the playoffs and who's getting ready for those conference championship games. Daryl, always appreciate it, my friend. We'll talk to you next week.
Sounds good. Take care.
Appreciate it. Mondays with the Moose, 3-time Super Bowl champion Daryl Johnston. And yeah, I just saw that come across on Twitter that Jerry is bailed on 105.3 The Fan tomorrow.
And he that's usually his favorite thing. He loves going on that show.
Well, I mean, yeah, he generally speaks his mind.
He does.
And rarely does he postpone. And for him to postpone right as the season ends, well, he's just creating content for the rest of us.